Blunderland, Chapter 2, Sergeant Major Totes, in which Barry learns that things are much worse than he thought. Do you remember these? Here's the bunch of keys. They're big now, but when Barry held them as he stumbled down that dark corridor, they were small, because he was small. He was scuttling on his little legs, and he finally reached the door. It was small, but then so was he. By the light in the wall above the door, he could see it was made of solid wood, and it had a big round doorknob, which Barry tried and found would not turn. The door was locked all right, but of course he had, in his right hand, his bunch of keys, which had shrunk with him, as I said. Under the doorknob was a keyhole, and just as Dr. Cow had promised, Barry found that the smallest key fitted. Barry turned it and heard a satisfying click. He put the keys back in his pocket and stood with his hand on the doorknob. What would he find behind the door? Taking a deep breath, he turned the knob. As the door swung open, he got a blast of cold air and a view of a vast, great plain. It seemed to be early morning, a rosy-fingered dawn. Barry stepped across the threshold and looked around. "In your own time, soldier," barked a loud voice, which made poor Barry jump with fright. And turning the other way, the door he had come through had vanished. Barry saw a fierce-looking toad wearing combats and a military cap. He was on his hind legs, and his fat paunch was held in by a tight belt, and under his arm he had a stick, and the toad leered, a wicked, warty leer at Barry, and peered at him closely. "Lost your kit, I see." The stick was used to poke at Barry a bit. "And way behind the rest. This exercise has got to be completed, soldier." Barry blinked in stunned and frightened silence. And then he finally stammered, Are you Sergeant Major Totes?" "No, I'm the Queen of the May." The toad grinned unpleasantly and the warts on his throat throbbed. "Now get moving to the next checkpoint, or have I got to lick you into shape?" And the toad flicked out a very long, crusty tongue. Barry flinched and stepped back. Sergeant Major Totes was indicating across the plain with his stick. In the distance, there was some kind of hut. It looked so small, so far away. Barry started to move, anything to get away from Sergeant Major Totes. But the sergeant's voice followed him as Barry broke into a jog. "Move, soldier, left, right, left, right. When I say jump, you jump. Left, right, left, and then the Sergeant Major began a rhythmic kind of chant or song. "Anything that you can do, I can make it worse for you. Anything that you can do, I can make it worse for you. Be as good as you can be, you're not good enough for me. Be as good as you can be, you're not good enough for me. Be you near or be you far, no escape from what you are. Be you near or be you far, no escape from what you are. Be you big or be you small, green goo always gets you all. Be you big or be you small, green goo always gets you all." And so, with the sergeant's song resounding in his ears, Barry began to run across this vast plain on his little legs towards the sunrise. The sergeant major's song got fainter. But Barry kept up the jog and then the march. Jog some, march some. Keep those little legs moving, in time to the rhythm of the song, still faintly audible in the distance. But there was another problem now. Perhaps there'd been a lot of rain, but the ground beneath Barry's was decidedly squelchy. He was having to be a bit careful where he put his feet because, and here was the weird thing in a day of weird things, the mud that was oozing upwards was not brown, but green. Be you big or be you small, green goo always gets you all. Was this the green goo that he could see between the tufts of grass? Barry became aware that he was not alone. He hadn't noticed before, but there were uniformed soldiers, bigger than him, of course, running alongside and behind him and taking up the sergeant major's chant as they ran along. Had he overtaken them? Surely Sergeant Major Totes had implied he was the last. He was at the back. Barry was quite cheered by this. Not so bad then. Running is my thing, he thought. But the ground was getting soggier and boggier and also greener, but not in a good way. The trick is to find the stepping stones, the firmer places, and use those, said a big girl running alongside. I haven't seen you before. Are you in the 8th Dregulars? I suppose I am, answered Barry, still jogging. I really don't know, but I would like to avoid this slime. Yeah, if you get the slime, you'll have to do extra drill or be sent to the can, said the cheery girl. So Barry, not sure what the can was, but sure it wasn't going to be anything nice, tried to pick out the stones, the firmer places on which to run, but the stones he picked somehow seemed to tip and squelch, and his socks and his legs got splattered with green goo. He kept going, wondering why the other runners did not seem bothered. Because he was smaller than them, he was looking mainly at their legs and feet, and of course they were wearing camouflaged combat dress, trousers and boots, and the spatters of slime didn't really show so much, whereas Barry, he was dressed in, well, light brown shorts and socks and red trainers, and when he strained his neck up, he just saw more green combats. But then, as he looked at the face of the big girl who'd spoken to him, he saw that her skin was green as well. She was green as grass, green as slime. All green, in fact. Barry, still trying to keep up with the running and marching and avoiding the boggy bits, looked at the other runners and to his horror saw that everyone was green. He could not stop himself saying, oh, you're all of you, you're all green. The runners at that slowed down and they turned on Barry. They stopped. They stood around him, feet apart, hands on hips, scowling at him. You're a cheeky fellow, Shrimp, said one of them. Who are you calling green? What's green anyway? We don't know what you're talking about. Come on, guys, let's get this training session done. All this talk of green is nonsense. And with that, the pack of them turned around and began marching again. Call us red or call us green, no idea what you mean. Barry was not sorry they'd gone. He supposed he'd better run on to the checkpoint, that little hut he could see. Nearer now, what else could he do in this great wide plain? The sun was high in the sky when he reached the checkpoint. The other runners had passed it a long time before. Barry was disadvantaged, of course, by his little legs, and his heart sank, though he was not surprised, when out of the hut came Sergeant Major Totes. Stand to attention, soldier. Thumbs in line with the seams of your trousers. Barry waited for the onslaught. He was pretty sure what was coming next. You've got slime, soldier, Slime all over you. Look at it, on your shoes and your socks and your shorts. It's everywhere. It isn't quite everywhere, sir. I tried really hard, and some bits of me are still quite clean. The sergeant had disappeared into the hut and came out with some rags. Clean yourself up, soldier, he barked. I ought to send you to do the whole circuit again. But I'm feeling kind. And he leered at Barry and licked his lips with that horrible long tongue. Barry picked up the rags and started to rub at the spots of slime on his leg. The slime was gooey and sticky. All that happened was that it made the cloth green, and then it made his hands green, and he wiped his hands on a stone, and his hands made the stone green. And then Barry couldn't help it. He was very tired after his run, and he'd been given an impossible job to do. He sat down on the ground, put his head in his hands, which made his cheeks green, and he began to cry. He cried great big tears, and the tears were green, slimy goo, which stained his face and his clothes even more. Sergeant Major Totes stood looking at this greener and greener little heap on the floor, and he began to sing softly. Be you near or be you far, no escape from what you are. Barry heard the slightly kinder tone of Totes' voice and lifted his head. But what can I do? I'm very small and green, and it seems it's coming from the inside out. I'm taking you into custody, said the Sergeant Major. It's the can for you. And without so much as a by your leave, he put one of his fingers into the belt of Barry's shorts and lifted him up. With the green, sticky little boy hooked on his finger, he carried him incommodiously round to the back of the hut, whistling a tune all the time. There was a small lock-up there. It had no windows, but the door stood open. So this was the can. Not so much a can, more of a can't, said Sergeant Major Totes, laughing at his own joke. This could be your lucky day, son, he said, and he lowered Barry onto the straw which covered the floor of the lock-up. This is a lock-up. I am locking the door with a key. The door slammed shut and Barry heard the key turn in the lock. He heard the sergeant walking away. Again the song. But this time he thought he heard these words. Take the hardest lesson first. Someone loves you at your worst. Take the hardest lesson first. Someone loves you at your worst. But there really did seem no way out of here. The lock-up was small. Totally blind in the pitch dark, Barry felt all around the walls at the bottom on hands and knees, and then standing up. And then he remembered the strange way the sergeant had shut the door in saying he was locking him in. With a key. With a key. Dr. Cal had said not to forget about the keys. Why, Barry still had his bunch of keys in the pocket of his shorts. Could it be? Could it be? He got out his key ring and he found the second key, the second smallest key, and fumbling with his sticky fingers for the door and the keyhole, he fitted it in the lock and taking a deep breath, he turned it. Sergeant Major Totes reminds us of the doctrine of total depravity. You know, the Bible says that while we are not as bad as we could be, and while we might appear very good compared to some other people, yet the fact is that merely by being members of the human race, the fallen human race, We're polluted from the inside, not with green goo like Barry, but with sin. There is no escape from what we are. Even on our best days, by ourselves, we are unable to please God and unable to get to heaven. That is the truth of it, isn't it? It is as though we are in a prison cell called can't. We must take the hardest lesson first. And we'll go into to discover that someone loves you at your worst. The Bible says that while we were still sinners, Christ died for us.